Welcome back to Avoidant Decoded, where we uncover the hidden psychology behind distance, silence, emotional walls, and the complicated ways avoidants experience love. If you want to understand what happens beneath the surface when someone pulls away, make sure you join the membership of Avoidant Decoded and become part of our deeper journey into attachment, relationships, and emotional connection. Now, let's uncover what their distance may really be telling you. What if their distance isn't proof that they stopped loving you, but a sign that their feelings have become too real to ignore? Sometimes the person who pulls away is not running from you. They are running from the vulnerability your connection awakens inside them. But the real question is not whether they leave and come back. It is whether every return brings more honesty, more effort, and more emotional courage. Because true love is not measured by how intensely someone feels. It is revealed by how willing they become to grow. When an avoidant genuinely develops deep feelings for you, the first thing you may notice is not effortless closeness. Instead, you may notice tension. The connection can feel unusually strong, peaceful, and natural, and then suddenly, just when everything seems to be settling into place, they begin pulling away. Their replies become shorter, their presence becomes less consistent, and they may seem emotionally distant without giving you a clear reason. It is easy to look at that change and assume their feelings have disappeared. But for someone with avoidant tendencies, emotional distance can sometimes appear precisely because the relationship has started to matter. Love can bring an avoidant into emotional territory they are not accustomed to handling. They may experience a powerful sense of connection while simultaneously feeling exposed by it. They enjoy being close to you, yet that same closeness can activate fears they have carried for years. This is why their behavior may seem contradictory. One moment they are warm, engaged, and deeply present. The next they are quiet, unavailable, or asking for space. It can look confusing from the outside, but internally they may be struggling between the desire to connect and the instinct to protect themselves. One of the more meaningful things to observe is not simply whether they pull away, but whether the connection continues to return. Avoidant relationships can move through periods of closeness and distance, but the important part is what happens after each period apart. Do they return with slightly more openness? Do they communicate a little better? Are they more willing to spend time with you or discuss what they are feeling? Those small changes can tell you much more than one isolated moment of withdrawal. Sometimes a significant relationship does not begin with complete certainty. It begins with questions, unusual chemistry, periods of silence, and a feeling that something about the connection is different. Conversations may become deeper than either person expected. Time together may feel unusually comfortable. Even when the avoidant refuses to put their feelings into words, they may recognize internally that this relationship is not simply casual. That realization can be both comforting and frightening. Around you, they may feel accepted in a way they are not used to experiencing. At the same time, being understood so deeply can make them feel exposed. They may feel safe enough to open up, yet vulnerable enough to fear what could happen if they become emotionally dependent. They may worry about losing their freedom, being controlled, becoming too attached, or eventually experiencing painful rejection. The stronger their feelings become, the louder some of these fears can become. That is why the beginning of deeper intimacy can sometimes trigger withdrawal. The relationship starts feeling real, and suddenly their protective instincts become active. Their communication changes. Their enthusiasm becomes less obvious. The affection that once seemed natural becomes inconsistent. From your perspective, it can feel like watching something beautiful disappear without explanation. But this is where your response matters. When someone becomes distant, the natural reaction is often to chase the closeness. You may send additional messages, ask what happened, seek reassurance, or try harder to restore the connection. Those reactions come from understandable fear, but they can unintentionally increase the pressure an avoidant already feels. The more urgently they are asked to explain their emotions, the more they may feel cornered. And when they feel emotionally trapped, their instinct may be to create even more distance. A healthier response begins when you stop allowing their withdrawal to control your emotional state. You do not have to pretend that their behavior does not hurt. You simply stop interpreting every quiet period as proof that you are unwanted or that the relationship has ended. You remain grounded, protect your self-respect, and allow them the space to process without abandoning your own standards. That is not playing games. It is not about becoming cold so they will chase you. It is about refusing to build your emotional stability around another person's temporary behavior. For someone who associates intimacy with pressure or loss of independence, calmness can feel very different. They can experience your care without feeling that they constantly have to reassure you. They can recognize your presence without feeling forced to immediately define every emotion. Over time, this can help them discover that closeness does not necessarily mean losing themselves. Eventually, you may notice a familiar cycle. They withdraw, process whatever is happening internally, and then begin moving toward you again. Sometimes the return is subtle. A simple message, a small gesture, a warmer conversation, a willingness to spend time together. But remember, their return by itself is not proof that the relationship is becoming healthier. The real question is whether the pattern is changing. If every separation is followed by exactly the same behavior, the same confusion, the same emotional pain, and the same lack of accountability, then repetition should not be mistaken for progress. But if every reunion brings even a little more honesty, consistency, communication, or emotional presence, something important may be developing. Avoidant growth is often gradual rather than dramatic. You may see them respond more openly than before. They might apologize without being pushed. They may stay in a difficult conversation instead of immediately shutting down. Their periods of distance may become shorter. They may begin expressing affection more consistently. They may still need space, but instead of completely disappearing, they communicate that need. Those small changes matter because real emotional growth often happens quietly. Eventually, the avoidant can begin learning a new emotional truth. Intimacy does not have to equal control. Loving someone does not mean surrendering their identity. Being emotionally close does not require giving up independence. And needing another person emotionally does not automatically make them weak or trapped. That lesson cannot be forced through arguments, demands, or emotional pressure. It has to be experienced repeatedly through a relationship where closeness and individuality can exist together. And when an avoidant begins discovering that they can love deeply without losing themselves, the relationship can finally move beyond the cycle of fear and withdrawal towards something much more secure, honest, and emotionally fulfilling. Real change with an avoidant usually does not happen because of one powerful conversation. It develops through repeated experiences that teach them something new. They may step back, ask for space, and create distance, yet the relationship remains stable. They return, and instead of being met with anger, pressure, or punishment, they find consistency. Slowly, their nervous system begins learning that closeness does not automatically mean losing freedom. That trust appears in small behaviors. They stay engaged during uncomfortable conversations instead of immediately escaping. They communicate more clearly. Their defenses soften. They begin revealing thoughts they once kept private. Even their silence can feel different because you start noticing that they still maintain a connection rather than completely shutting you out. This is how trust is built, not through endless promises, but through repeated proof that intimacy can exist without fear controlling everything. Over time, the distance may not disappear, but it becomes less extreme. Their returns feel more sincere. They seem less guarded and more willing to remain emotionally present. These changes are easy to miss because they rarely look dramatic. Yet real emotional growth often happens through tiny shifts repeated consistently. And while they are changing, you are being challenged to change too. You learn that loving someone does not require abandoning your own emotional stability. At first, you may believe that their commitment will finally make you feel secure. Eventually, you realize your peace cannot depend on whether they are warm today or distant tomorrow. You begin developing your own routines, boundaries, confidence, and identity outside the relationship. That does not make your love weaker, it makes it healthier. You can care deeply without making another person responsible for your emotional well-being. When you remain grounded, the relationship becomes lighter. You are no longer silently communicating, "Stay close, so I can feel okay." Instead, your behavior says, "I love you, but I am still whole," without constant reassurance. That creates breathing room for both people. An avoidant cannot be pushed into emotional readiness, and you cannot heal them for them. When one person constantly pursues while the other continually retreats, both eventually become exhausted. Healthy progress begins when both people take responsibility for their own patterns. The avoidant learns to communicate their need for space instead of disappearing. You learn not to treat every pause as rejection or abandonment. You begin separating genuine intuition from fear-driven anxiety. Eventually, the relationship may reach a point where the difference becomes obvious. The silence that once lasted weeks becomes shorter. They initiate contact without needing an excuse. Vulnerability becomes easier. Most importantly, they stop merely tolerating closeness and begin choosing it. That distinction matters. Tolerating intimacy means staying despite discomfort. Choosing intimacy means trusting the relationship enough to remain emotionally present. When that shift happens, the connection starts feeling more mutual. You no longer feel responsible for carrying everything. Their actions begin showing intention, accountability, and genuine investment. So if an avoidant repeatedly leaves and returns, do not judge the relationship only by whether they come back. Anyone can return because they miss someone. Ask whether something is actually changing. Are they becoming more honest? Are they communicating before taking space? Are they becoming more accountable? Or are you simply being placed back into the same cycle? And ask yourself the same difficult questions. Are you becoming stronger and more secure, or increasingly anxious and emotionally exhausted? A relationship can either help two people grow or slowly make both of them lose themselves. Even genuine progress does not mean setbacks disappear. An avoidant may still become overwhelmed or need distance. The difference is what happens afterward. They communicate more clearly, return with greater emotional awareness, and no longer use silence as a way to avoid responsibility. You may still feel hurt, but you recover without spiraling. Your boundaries become stronger, your reactions calmer, and your sense of self remains intact. That is what real progress looks like. Not perfection, not constant closeness, but two people gradually learning how to handle fear without allowing fear to control the relationship. Emotional maturity does not mean creating a relationship where conflict and uncertainty never exist. It means learning how to face those moments without allowing fear to control every reaction. You communicate more calmly, protect your emotional health, and still remain honest about what you need. Real progress is created through repeated choices, difficult conversations, and consistent effort, not through romantic fantasy or simply hoping things will eventually change. If you are involved with an avoidant, remember that love is not proven by the complete disappearance of fear. Sometimes it is shown by the willingness of both people to keep growing, even while fear is present. But patience must never become self-abandonment. Giving someone time to heal does not mean accepting poor treatment, ignoring your needs, or surviving on occasional attention. Healthy patience has boundaries. You can understand their struggle while still expecting honesty. You can respect their need for space while also expecting basic communication and respect. Healing may take time, but time by itself accomplishes very little when there is no genuine effort behind it. This is where compassionate people can lose themselves. They begin excusing the same behavior repeatedly because they believe understanding someone's wounds means tolerating everything. A healthy relationship should show some form of movement. It may be slow, but there should be evidence of growth, greater honesty, stronger accountability, more consistency, increased emotional courage, and a willingness to communicate rather than constantly disappear. Slow progress is still progress. Repeating the exact same painful cycle without change is not. So keep your heart open, but keep your eyes open too. Love can challenge you to become stronger, but it should never demand that you erase yourself. If the relationship repeatedly costs you your peace while producing no meaningful improvement, that reality deserves your attention. Relationships involving avoidance can feel especially powerful because they expose parts of both people that might otherwise remain hidden. The avoidant is forced to confront intimacy, independence, and the protective walls they have built around themselves. Meanwhile, you may discover your own fears, perhaps your need to feel chosen, your fear of abandonment, or your tendency to chase reassurance from someone who struggles to provide it. In that way, the relationship becomes a mirror. It reveals unresolved patterns in both people. But personal growth alone does not mean a relationship must last forever. Pain does not automatically make a connection meaningful. What matters is whether that growth eventually creates greater honesty, emotional security, responsibility, and mutual effort. If only one person keeps doing the emotional work while the other continually hides behind fear, the relationship may be teaching you something about yourself rather than preparing you for a permanent partnership. A relationship can transform you without being meant to remain in your life forever. When a connection truly becomes healthier, its entire atmosphere begins changing. Anxiety slowly gives way to peace. Confusion becomes easier to understand. You stop analyzing every silence or interpreting every change in mood as a warning. The avoidant, meanwhile, becomes less likely to experience emotional conversations as threats to their independence. Trust begins occupying the space where fear once lived. The relationship starts being guided less by survival instincts and more by conscious decisions. They communicate instead of disappearing. You respond with curiosity instead of immediately assuming rejection. They return with honesty instead of repeating the same defenses. You maintain your boundaries instead of sacrificing yourself simply to keep the connection alive. Over time, these small choices create something powerful. The relationship becomes stronger, not because difficulties disappear, but because both people learn how to move through difficult moments without destroying what they have built. So if you are wondering whether an avoidant relationship has real long-term potential, do not measure it only by chemistry, longing, or how intensely you miss each other. Look at the direction. Are they becoming more open and accountable? Are you becoming more secure and grounded? Is communication improving? Are the periods of distance becoming healthier? Are both people contributing instead of leaving one person responsible for carrying the entire relationship? Those answers reveal far more than emotional intensity ever could. The strongest relationships do not always begin perfectly. Sometimes they begin through confusion, distance, and fear. What makes them meaningful is what happens afterward. Two people choosing growth over old patterns, returning with greater understanding, and slowly creating the emotional safety they once believed was impossible. Sometimes, the most powerful love story is not the one that starts effortlessly, but the one where both people learn, step by step, to move toward each other without losing themselves along the way. You can love deeply without making their emotional availability the measure of your worth. And perhaps that is one of the greatest lessons these relationships can teach. Sometimes you enter a relationship believing the other person needs to change before you can feel secure, only to discover that your own emotional security cannot be outsourced to anyone. You begin learning how to sit with uncertainty without immediately reacting to it. You learn how to communicate without chasing. You learn how to maintain boundaries without becoming cold. You learn that someone's temporary distance does not have the power to define who you are. At the same time, a genuinely growing avoidant begins learning their own lessons. They discover that asking for space does not require disappearing. Vulnerability does not automatically lead to control. Intimacy does not mean losing independence. Difficult conversations do not have to end in emotional chaos. Love can provide closeness while still allowing two people to remain individuals. That realization is rarely instant. It is built through hundreds of small experiences in which both people respond differently than they once did. They communicate instead of disappearing. You listen instead of assuming. They return with accountability instead of pretending nothing happened. You express your needs without demanding that they immediately remove every fear you have. Slowly, the relationship becomes less controlled by survival instincts and more guided by conscious choice. This is what makes a relationship genuinely secure. Not the absence of difficult moments, but the ability to move through those moments without destroying trust. There will still be setbacks. There may still be days when an avoidant becomes overwhelmed, needs distance, or struggles to express what is happening internally. You may still experience disappointment or uncertainty. But growth means those moments no longer erase everything that came before them. Both people learn how to repair instead of simply retreating. Both learn how to take responsibility instead of blaming fear. Both learn that love is not proven by intensity alone. It is proven by consistency, courage, respect, and the willingness to keep becoming better partners. So if you are wondering whether your connection with an avoidant has a future, stop looking only at how strong the chemistry feels or how painful the distance becomes. Look at the direction. Is trust increasing? Is communication improving? Is accountability becoming mutual? Are you becoming stronger rather than smaller? Is the avoidant becoming more capable of staying emotionally present? Are both of you moving toward each other instead of expecting one person to do all the changing? Those answers will tell you far more than 1,000 emotional moments ever could, because the strongest relationships are not necessarily the ones that begin without fear. They are the ones where fear is gradually replaced by understanding, where distance becomes healthier, where boundaries create respect instead of separation, and where two people learn that they can love each other without losing themselves. And if that transformation is happening, you will not need to force it, chase it, or constantly prove your worth. You will see it in the behavior. You will feel it in the stability. You will recognize it in the growing peace between you. But if the relationship continues demanding your patience while giving you no honesty, no accountability, and no meaningful movement, then loving someone does not require you to wait forever. Sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is accepting that a powerful connection can still be the wrong place to remain. In the end, love should not ask you to choose between another person and yourself. Healthy love creates room for both. It allows one person to heal without making the other person suffer indefinitely. It allows closeness without control, independence without emotional abandonment, and vulnerability without fear becoming the ruler of the relationship. That is the real goal, not simply getting an avoidant to stay, but creating a connection where both people genuinely choose to stay. Because when two people stop letting their old wounds write the future, love stops being a cycle of chasing and escaping and becomes something far more meaningful. Two imperfect people consciously choosing growth, choosing honesty, choosing each other, and choosing themselves at the same time.